Although this is not the end of the whole tale, we reach in chapters 7 to 8 the dramatic climax where the truth comes out and fortunes are reversed. We saw in the previous reading how the tables had begun to turn for both Haman and Mordecai, and how even Haman's own family discerned his eventual doom. Haman has had no time to process these things, as he is bustled off to the second banquet given by Esther. We are not told if he is now worried or whether he has resumed his sense of self-satisfaction at the repetition of this great honour. In Persian style, the three of them are reclining on couches. The king once again asks Esther what her request is and repeats the offer of up to half his kingdom. This is not literal, but it is an idiom referring to a great gift. The king must by now be highly intrigued by Esther's reticence. The moment has come. In verse 3, Esther addresses him for the first time in the second person, saying, "If I have won your favour, O king." Thus she makes her plea more personal. But at the same time, she unites herself to her people and their fate. Until now, the king had no idea Esther was a Jew. She reveals it by facing death alongside them. Esther's words in verse 4 about being sold probably refer to the silver Haman promised to pay the king. If so, the king must realize he is partly to blame for this astonishing predicament, which now affects him intimately. If this is the case, Esther must mean that being sold into slavery would probably not be an issue for the king, and she would not have bothered him about it. But if she is to be killed, it is worthy of mention. The king is so angry and shocked he has to leave the room for a moment. Mixed with the shock is the knowledge that his decree cannot be revoked. Haman knows death is imminent and effectively commits suicide by getting too close to the queen. In 11th century Assyria, for example, no one was allowed to come within 7 paces of a member of the harem. He pleads for his life, and so his risk is justified in a way that reminds us of how Esther risked her life in approaching the king in the inner court. But his supplicatory gesture is misinterpreted by the king, who has returned into the room. Even as the king is exploding in outrage, Haman is probably being executed. The fact that they are covering his face likely means he is dead. The gallows which Haman had constructed for Mordecai was probably in fact a stake, in this case one made ludicrously high at 75 feet. Hanging was not a method of execution in Persia, so the purpose of the stake, upon which the corpse was impaled, was to prevent burial and expose the criminal to disgrace and being pecked at by birds. Haman's cadaver is given the treatment he had planned for Mordecai. It is a reversal of the honours he had planned for himself, which he was forced to give Mordecai when he led him round on a royal horse. Once again, as with having dispatched the former queen, the king's anger is abated. All that was Haman's is now transferred to Mordecai via Esther. Mordecai comes into the presence of the king, the wording of which shows that he now has the special access to the king which Haman had previously. That is, he could come to the court without being summoned. Esther now pleads with the king through her tears. The scene is the same as in chapter 7. Verse 1 of chapter 8 says that on the day that the king gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, and in verse 3 it says that Esther spoke again to the king. Thus her prostration before him is supplicatory, and his extending the scepter is not a new version of what took place in chapter 5. Although it is not clear from the king's response, who points to what he has done already in the name of justice to Haman, their action is constrained by the earlier edict. The tactic is revealed in verse 11, which is to remove royal protection from the attackers and allowing the Jews to defend themselves. The best they can do is allow the Jews to prepare and fight for their lives. The colours which Mordecai wears can only be worn by those close to the king, and the crown shows he has the king's favour, not that he is a ruler. The chapter ends with the amazing note that many in the various cities joined the Jews. Such was the fear of them.